I'm joined in the studio by Freddie Weyman. He's an African campaigner at the charity Survival International. A very good morning to you. Tell us a little bit about Survival International and why is World Environment Day relevant to what you do?
So Survival International is the global movement for tribal people's rights, and it has been campaigning for 45 years, helping tribal peoples defend their lives, protect their lands and determine their own futures. And in relation to World Environment Day, the conservation movement since its very beginnings in America in the early 20th century has violated the rights of tribal and indigenous peoples. Their ancestral homelands are often wrongfully viewed as so-called wildernesses, despite the fact that they've cared for them, they've managed them for generations, and they are illegally evicted from their homes. They are accused of poaching for when they hunt to feed their families, and they face arrest, beatings, torture, and in some cases even death at the hands of anti-poaching squads, government anti-poaching squads.
So some of these conservation groups are actually doing more harm than good because they're not understanding the importance of tribal indigenous people.
Exactly, yeah. So this is something we're trying to showcase today, the various ways in which tribal peoples are the best conservationists, the original conservationists, the conservation skills that they have, as well as the intimate knowledge they have of the environment. So to give one example, the Baka hunter-gatherers who live in the rainforest of Cameroon, they have an incredible understanding of their environment. They use almost 500 kinds of plant from the forest for all sorts of purposes, for food, for medicine, for beauty treatments for women to epilate their legs,
living,
for everything, general living, to live a good life in the forest. And they're also experts on animal behavior. They have dozens of words for the forest elephant, depending on its age, its sex, its temperament. And as well as understanding their environment so well, they've also had a hand in shaping it and improving it for various kinds of wildlife. For example, women, it's normally women who do this, harvest more than 10 types of wild yams in the forest, often with the help of particular birds which show them these kind of patches. And by leaving a part of the root intact in the soil, they spread these pockets of wild yams through the forest, and that's a favourite food of elephants and bush pigs and things like that.
Now, the footage we're seeing at the moment of the Bushmen of the Kalahari, and they've had a really tortured history. They've been in this area for centuries, and yet they've had to fight against governments and corporations trying to evict them from their ancestral lands.
Exactly. So the Bushmen have been violently evicted from their homes in the Central Kalahari Game Reserve in 3 different waves, in 1997, 2002 and 2005. Botswana's High Court ruled that these evictions were illegal, that the Bushmen had the right to return and live freely on their ancestral lands, that they had the right to hunt, and that a ban on banning the Bushmen in the Central Kalahari Game Reserve from hunting was tantamount to a death sentence.
Starving them, basically.
Exactly. This is what Botswana's own High Court judge ruled. And the government just has flouted this ruling completely. It's now banned hunting throughout the country and not providing any alternative for the Bushmen living in the Central Kalahari Game Reserve.
When tribal groups are actually removed from their homesteads, where are they placed?
So it depends. In the case of the Bushmen, they've been relocated, evicted, to camps outside of the reserve, places which they've called to us. These are places of death. This is places where diseases like HIV/AIDS are rife, alcoholism, prostitution, all of these problems which didn't exist, at least not to the same extent, inside the reserve.
And there's a sense of history repeating itself here, because there is the argument that what they're going through in terms of being removed from your natural territory, placed somewhere foreign, being exposed to lifestyle conditions, illnesses, etc., very reminiscent of what happened to the Aborigines in Australia.
Absolutely, and the Native Americans in the US. And that's where this idea of conservation began, the idea that there are these parts of a landscape which need ridding of all human presence, and that's consciously being repeated in Africa, in Asia, throughout the whole world.
But part of the problem, surely, is that your organisation recognises this, and it hasn't been recognised, the importance of these groups staying where they are, their environmental benefit hasn't been recognised by other conservation groups. And as long as that gulf in knowledge exists, then the people that you're trying to help will always be vulnerable.
To some extent, but there's also growing evidence that proves this. You know, there's satellite imagery, And in a way, it's common sense. The reason that these forests or these lands are attractive to conservationists in the first place is because these people have cared for them for so long. And so part of the problem is that conservationists are so hopelessly out of touch with what's actually happening with their funds on the ground. And they've somehow set up this, they've created this impression that they are scientific and data-driven, but really they have very little idea exactly what's happening. For example, in Cameroon, where the Baka live, the Baka are the eyes and ears of the forest. They've said to us, we know when there are poachers in the forest, we know where they are, but no one will listen to us.
Right, so there are actually grounds for people working together, but is there a sense that perhaps some of the traditional conservation groups are now coming round to your way of thinking? Because at the end of the day, everybody wants the same thing. We want to preserve the environment, and we want to preserve the animals who live there, protect them against the dangers of poaching and other forces.
So yes, many conservation organisations, like WWF, for example, have made these commitments on paper to respect Indigenous people's rights and recognise the central role they play in conservation. But often the reality is very different. In Cameroon, WWF is funding these anti-poaching squads which torture, intimidate, arrest, even in some cases kill Baka and their neighbours. And they've known about this for more than 10 years, and they have failed consistently to take effective action.
So still a lot of ground to cover, but signs of progress anyway. Freddie, sadly, time goes against us, but thank you so much for joining us
on
this World Environment Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.